So thank you all. It's so wonderful to be here with y'all. I attended AHSIE last year for the first time, and I just had a wonderful experience. I mostly attend research conferences because I do a lot of research, and so I go to research conferences. And this conference was just so powerful for me because I got to spend time with practitioners who actually could implement the work. I am a product of an HSI, and also I worked with an HSI grant when I worked at Cal State Fullerton. So I've been thinking about HSIs for a long time, and I think about their impact, and I think about why I'm standing here, and I really attribute my success and like my ability to stand here, and like I have a PhD from UCLA, which is one of the most prestigious institutions in the whole country, and I attribute that to going to an HSI, right? Like I became who I was at an HSI, right? So I just value HSIs, and all the work I do is really just to shed light on how powerful they are. So with this talk, I really move into the cultural elements, right? Like how what you do will ultimately affect your outcomes, right? But I want us to think about outcomes beyond just graduation, right? And like in class, like in completion, right? Course completion rates, and start to think about what happens after they leave, right? Do they enroll in graduate school? Do they get a job? Do they become engaged as alumni? That's gonna matter, right? I know of 2 articles that talk about alumni engagement in HSIs, and that's it, 2 out of like, I don't know, I've probably read at least 200 articles that have some sort of reference to an HSI, right? And there's only 2 that talk about alumni engagement. So we gotta start thinking about how do you then re-engage your alumni base, right? To help move HSIs forward. That matters. It's gonna matter, right? We gotta start thinking about that now, right? And so what I also, with this presentation is really started to think about this idea of praxis, right? And so praxis comes from this idea of like liberation, right? And if you think about Freire and Pedagogy of the Press, how many of y'all are familiar with that piece? Okay, a good amount of y'all are, good, right? So praxis is this idea of taking like what's, at a basic level, what's sort of theoretical idea of liberating folks into practice, right? And using that for action. So the definition I have here is reflection and action upon an oppressive world in order to transform it, right? So that is this idea that we have to first recognize that the structures that we're working within are highly oppressive structures for your students, right? And guess what? We all, as administrators and faculty, uphold the oppressive structures. All right, I could give you example after example of how we do when we continue to uphold the oppressive structures, right? And that's what the model really is getting you to think about various aspects of the campus where you can start to sort of disrupt the oppressive structures, right? Because we uphold them. Right? So first step is for us to recognize that the oppression exists within our structural ways of being, right? The things we're asking students to do is part of this sort of oppressive structure. So we have to recognize the structure first before we can disrupt it, right? And that's where praxis will start to come into play, right? And that's why I love that this room is full, because y'all are the ones that can go out there and do it. Right? So I'm going to present these very theoretical ideas to y'all, but I want y'all to think about how do you go out and actually do this? How do you disrupt oppressive structures, right? Like let's stop thinking about diversity and inclusion, because y'all are at HSIs, y'all got that. Check. You got that, right? You are diverse, right? You got the diversity. That's a check mark, right? And believe me, until you find yourself moving from a place where there's lots of compositional diversity to a place where it's very white, you don't really realize how important that is, right? So you need the mass. Y'all already have the mass. What I want y'all to start thinking about is the goal is equity and justice and liberation. Right? That's when I talk about this idea of decolonizing HSIs, and as I went back and really thought through it, I'm like, that's kind of what I'm arguing, right? That I want you to start thinking that your outcome is liberation, right? You're talking about liberation of your folks, right? Which is why what you do in your like classroom and outside of your classroom and within the structures matter, right? In order to liberate everybody, right? And we want to liberate all of us within the structures, right? And not continue to reinforce colonial ways of thinking, which I'm going to get into, right? So that's really what I'm thinking about when I think about praxis. And I want to make sure I stated that so we understand as we move forward what praxis, how I'm referring to praxis. So what we start to see if you go into like why, like, and this work really started when I was a graduate student. I really was like, well, why are Latino students always underperforming, right? Like, why? Why? There's got to be a bigger answer, right? And I really started to think about historically that we have always been the ones that we were not supposed to be getting an education, right? Like, policies have been set in place, right, to keep us from knowing our own ways of knowing, right, continually. Right? So as I really got into like, okay, there's all these historical reasons and all these structural policy reasons why Latinos are not advancing or achieving at the same rate as white people, right? Because the system doesn't want us to. Right? And so if we really start to get into policy and you get into like critical race policy work, that's what you'll start to find. So as I got into this and really thought about this and I read through history, I'm like, it makes all the sense in the world to me. Why would we think that black folks would ever excel when they, same thing, went through the same thing, slavery, history of slavery. We abolish slavery and then what happens? They can't learn. Right? Then they might overthrow us all. There's so many of them, right? White people got scared, real scared, right? Because there's more slaves, there are more black folks all of a sudden than there were white people, right? They're like, oh shoot, don't let them get an education because they're gonna overthrow all of us, right? So keep them uneducated, and then they can't think for themselves and they can't overthrow us and all this sort of things, right? So the systems have always continually been trying to keep us, folks of color, down, right? So it makes sense to me why you're students. So now when people ask why Latino students are, lower graduation rates or whatever, I'm like, racism. Coloniality of power? Okay, that should be your answer. That's your answer, all right? When people ask why, racism. Why are the numbers up? Because of racism. So until we stop being racist and upholding coloniality of power and colonial structures, Latino students are not going to excel. So really, right here, I start with mission and purpose. These are kind of connected, and I'm going to give you examples. Like I said, I wrote a mission for y'all and everything, which I hadn't done, that you got to first decide that you're going to decolonize your AHSIE. And what does that mean, and how do you put it into your mission, and how does it become your purpose, right? So that's this. If you're really going to go forward with this, or you're really going to move forward with anti-oppressive ways of thinking, or anti-racism, or decolonization, it's got to start here. It's got to be at an organizational level connected to who you are at your core, right? In connection with who you are at your core, right? Like we have to think about that, right? That you are who you are as an institution, and then you're also trying to become an institution that is liberating folks, right? Then I started to move in it. Okay, once we commit to this, then we can move into who's in the institution. And membership, I really think about faculty, staff, administrators, okay? Because your students, like I said, they're already diverse. You already have compositional diversity. You're like you blow everybody out of the water, right? You got everybody, black, Asian, we already know the numbers show you got all the students, right? Native folks, I mean, they're more likely to be in HSIs than any other institution. So you already got the students, but guess what? Your faculty, staff, all of them, they're not there, right? And I'm gonna show you some numbers there, right? The incentive structure, I'm gonna get into this one is powerful. This one is really this idea that you have to incentivize people to do this work. Right? So you have to give them something, and you know why? Because that's the kind of system we're in. People want incentives, right? So you have to give them something to be anti-racist, right? Otherwise, they're going to just keep being racist. I know, it's crazy, right? Like everyone should just not be racist, right? But the funny thing is, y'all laugh, all right? But first, I have to admit that I am upholding racism, right? Or that I'm racist, right? Right? People don't want to admit that. They don't want to admit they're actually upholding racist structures or that they're racist, right? So that's a whole piece right there. Just like, how do you convince people not to be racist if they say they're not even racist, right? Because if I ask all of you, I'm not going to ask y'all this one. But if I ask all y'all, how many of y'all are racist or uphold racist structures? You want to, okay, how many of y'all think you uphold racist structures? We'll go with that one. How many of y'all think you do? Okay, good. That's part of the healing. We gotta recognize. We gotta recognize first that we are doing this, right? All right, so the mission of a decolonized HSI. So this is like the mission if I brought all those things together and all the things I'm talking about, because I was like, I don't know what a mission would look like, but here it is, right? So our mission is to enroll, serve, and educate minoritized students with the goal of empowerment, liberation, and justice for all. All right, that's our mission. We seek to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive in our decision-making, our policies, and our practices. Right, so this is very specific, right? There's no missions like this. They're always like high in the sky, right? They don't make any sense. But this is like, nah, we're gonna be anti-oppressive in the way we make our decisions, in the policies we make, in our curricular structures, all that. In our practices, we're gonna be anti-racist, right? That's what our mission is to be. We'll work with internal and external stakeholders, including local businesses, alumni, community organizations, in order to do this to the curricular and co-curricular offerings of the institution. This is all of the pieces together in one statement. My really good colleague, Marcela Cuellar, she did this amazing study. Look up her study. She found statistical evidence that students that are at HSIs, they have a higher increase in their academic self-concept, right, than those at non-HSIs. I love that outcome. I identified with that because, like I said, I think I'm standing here today because of the academic self-concept I got as an undergrad, right? People told me I was smart. And I was like, I am? Okay, right? Like, right. How powerful when you tell students they're smart, right? Right, like that, like all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then they want to be smart because you told them they were smart, right? They were smart all the time, but brown people are so used to people telling us that we're not smart, right? So until we start to be told that we're smart, right? So my kids go to school in an urban school district, and I went to the school on Friday, and my 8-year-old, he was so like, I wish I would have recorded it. He reads the statement. They read the statement. He's in a school, 70% black kids. They read these statements. I am smart. I am amazing. They do these affirmations every single day, right? Because urban schools, we know those kids are not succeeding at the rates at a white school district, right? And I just love that, right? Like this idea that they stand there and affirm who they are, right? So that should be an outcome, right? So the questions have to be this, right? So who's gonna lead for justice and equity? Right? When you're hiring your new campus president, right? When you're on that search committee and when you're going to those open forums with them, you ask them hard questions about them leading for justice and equity. That's what you want. You want that person to lead for justice and equity, right? Who's going to make decisions that are just and equitable? Who's going to hire people equitably, right? How are we going to make sure that that's happening? How are we going to develop programs that promote justice and liberation? Right? Because we have to be focused on that if we're actually governing from this perspective. Develop curricula. How many of you are faculty? Okay, y'all got such an important job, because guess what students have to do? They have to go to class. They have to go to class, right? I know when you're on the student service side, and I'm a student affairs person by training, you're like, well, I want all the students to come to me. I have this great program. Why don't they come to me? Because they don't have to, right? But they got to go to class. So faculty, what you do to promote justice and liberation and create that critical consciousness is so key, right? But the reality is we're continuing to uphold white ways of knowing and being. We continue to read all the white dudes, right? We just had this Twitter conversation a couple days ago about higher ed scholars. We continue to cite Tinto and Weidman and Terenzini. Any of y'all know those folks, right? Those are the white models. Those are the models that say people of color have to transform, have to feel like they belong in that institution. And I'm like, we don't want to be within a white structure, right? We got to disrupt that, right? But that's what the white scholars have told us, right? That they have to integrate. I was like, that's the word I was looking for. Integrate into those structures, right? And that's problematic, right? Instead of saying, how do we disrupt those structures, right? So that they're open and equitable for all folks, right? Remember I talked about why we wait for it to be incentivized? Because this is the reality. We operate in a market-driven model of higher ed. This is a reality. We could argue it all day long, but the reality is this is the system we operate in, right? We have low regulation of everything, and we have high competition, right? And so this drives people to be driven by this. We are always looking at performance indicators of our individuals. We want rewards, right? We want market-driven outcomes, right? And we care about rankings, things like rankings. UCLA School of Ed, because I went there, we disrupt rankings all the time. Oh, rankings, they're so not right. They just create hierarchy in the system. They're invalid. Rankings, blah, blah, blah. Guess what happens when last week the UCLA Graduate School of Education is #1? Everybody's tweeting it. Everybody's tweeting it. Oh, we #1. And I'm like, really? Because like I remember when I was in that program, we were like, rankings, they're so invalid, right? Like, why are we basing people? We know these aren't really good measures of doing what you're doing. This just means that your dean knows other deans that write good letters for them, right? Seriously, rankings, this is not a good way to think about how well you're doing, y'all. Stop reinforcing these things, right? Like, don't care, stop caring about these things, right? Start caring about equity and justice. That's what we care about, right? When you're not in this rat race, you start caring about students, right? And stop caring about these things, right? But the reality is, we operate within it, right? These are external motivations. We're motivated externally, right? So how do you start to motivate people for this? It's got to be in your reward structures, right? Promotion and tenure. I talk about faculty promotion and tenure. They have to be rewarded for doing this work. You can't just expect them to do this work. You can't expect them to transform their entire curriculum. I've done this, one class, you gotta reward them to just transform one class, right? Your chemistry class, you want them to start operating from an equity and justice perspective, you gotta incentivize them. You gotta buy them out for a semester, right? Seriously, y'all laugh, y'all deans and whatnot, y'all better start buying out your faculty to do equity and justice work. Right? And then they will be like, how do I teach chemistry from an equity and justice perspective? They can figure it out if you're gonna motivate them, believe me. Motivate your chemistry people, motivate your engineers to do justice work, community justice work in your engineering program. That would be a fascinating HSI, right? That's what we're committed to as an engineering program. But you gotta motivate your faculty to do that. You gotta motivate your core people to do the work that they're doing or they're not gonna do it. right? So your graduate students eventually go on to be early career faculty, entry-level career staff, and entry-level administrative staff. You gotta think about all your people. Think about how you're rewarding everybody, right? I'm gonna use Santa Cruz, since I said they're doing really great work. The students at Santa Cruz, when I talked to them, remember what they said about the cleaning staff? I almost cried. These students said that the most important person to them on campus was their cleaning staff. Why? Because they speak Spanish and they're like my mom. Y'all, that's powerful. That was powerful. I wish I had recorded all that and written that up so we all could recognize how important your administrative staff and your people that throw out your trash and that clean your residence halls, how important they are to your students, right? So we gotta motivate all of them. Everybody has to be motivated to do the work, to help our students feel like they have a greater sense of belonging, right? So there's gotta be motivation here, before you go to the mid-level, and then before you get to high level. At every stage, you gotta motivate people to do this work. Everybody matters. Everybody matters in the institution, so don't focus just on one group, right? Because they all matter, and that was such a powerful statement when I was at Santa Cruz, that I was like, wow, we gotta write this down, y'all. We gotta share this story because it matters, right, to students.